Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Asian stock markets begin trade on a mixed note ahead of the Fed rate decision later tonight. The United Kingdom will hold snap elections between December 9th and 12th this year in order to break the 3-year-long Brexit deadlock. Prime Minister Narendra Modi calls for reforms at the United Nations, says the UN should be a body bringing about positive change and not just an institution. Telecom operator Bharti Airtel's average revenue per user falls for the first time in 4 quarters. This is as per the second quarter operational update issued by the company last evening. And the Reserve Bank of India imposes a penalty of 1 crore rupees on private sector lender Bandhan Bank for failing to comply with promoter shareholding norms. Let's talk about the US markets first. US stocks ended marginally lower on Tuesday. The S&P 500 retreated from its record high, and the Nasdaq Composite underperformed, losing over 0.5% after disappointing quarterly earnings from Google parent Alphabet. Renita Young of Bloomberg News tells you exactly what happened during that Wall Street session in this report.
U.S. markets ended lower on Tuesday, and the S&P 500 was farther away from its record high, all as a mixed bag of corporate earnings results come in, and investors await the end of the 2-day policy meeting for the Federal Reserve. The Fed is widely expected to cut interest rates by 0.25 percentage point. And during the session, we saw big drug giants report earnings like Merck and Pfizer, which reported better than expected results, and at one point had the S&P 500 a little bit higher, although it did close the session lower. During the session, we also saw the Nasdaq 100 dragging on disappointing results from Akami and Google parent Alphabet, which missed its profit expectations. We also saw Beyond Meat sinking as analysts cite rising competition and costs as a problem. Now, treasuries also edged higher during the session, and the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index and gold were lower, and auto catalyst metal palladium backed from that record high that it hit on Monday. And that's a look at your Tuesday Wall Street action. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, so all eyes are going to be on that Fed decision later tonight. But meanwhile, let's look at how the Asian markets are faring. Most of them should have opened up as of now. I'm joined live by Rosalind Chin, who's joining us from the Hong Kong studios. Good morning, Rosalind. How's it looking this morning?
Well, I think pretty similar over here, where most investors will also be looking across to the US Fed decision before making any sort of drastic moves today. We do see most of the markets here trading lower right now. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down by 0.14% at this moment in time. The Chinese markets also opened lower. The Shanghai Composite now losing about 1/5%. CSI 300 down just over 0.1%. We do also have a few other factors which are causing a little bit of uncertainty in the market, we could say. We've got the US and China trade situation, of course, that currently ongoing, whereby we've had the US coming out and saying, well, they do expect to sign a trade agreement on the sidelines of the APEC summit in November. This is, of course, after some reports from Reuters saying there was maybe a little bit of uncertainty about that. The South China Morning Post here in Hong Kong actually has a date and is saying it's going to be November 17th. So that, of course, may be playing into some of the sentiment in the region as well. And the corporate front, because, of course, we are full flow into the corporate earnings season right now. We've got PetroChina and Sinopec posting third quarter results today. Those big oil developers, of course, are key ones to watch over here in Asia. In Japan, we had some retail sales figures out today, which we saw them jumping month on month in the month of September by 7.1%. Looks like there was a bit of a rush there to get ahead of the sales tax hike, which came into play on the 1st of October. Right now, the Nikkei 225 is losing about 0.3%. Topics is just about flat, actually, and perhaps possibly looking like it might go into positive territory, perhaps a little bit more positively later in the session. Finally, a quick look at Australia. S&P ASX 200 losing by 0.7% right now. Third quarter CPI numbers came in pretty much in line with estimates. But, you know, Australia, like many of the other developed nations, is struggling to stoke inflation. And one of the issues with that is stagnant wage growth over there. Since June, the RBA has cut rates 3 times. The RBA Governor, Philip Lowe, has said as recently as Tuesday, in fact, that he's prepared to ease further if it's needed. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Now, let's talk about the big talking point over the course of the day, which is what's happening in the U.S. With regard to its monetary policy. The Federal Reserve is set to announce the policy decision later tonight. And while a rate decision seems to be more or less a done deal, perhaps the bigger question at this point is what comes after this? What is next? Kathleen Hayes of Bloomberg News tells us more.
Whole question about what happens in October. The Fed has done nothing to push back against expectations that it will cut its key rate by 25 basis points. But when you look out to December, that's where you see a difference. Jump into the Bloomberg library with me for a chart to see where the expectations are now. When people are talking about the odds of a cut in the next 24 hours, it's nearly 100%. Nobody's worried about that. When you look at December, though, you can see what was once looked at more in the 80% odds, 80% chance vicinity, is back down to under 30. So let's see what's going on here. First of all, let's start with the meeting tomorrow. Jay Powell, when he enters the press conference room again, as you see him doing in September, he may hit the pause button via a signal, not a statement that, well, you know, the trade news is getting better, the yield curve has been inverted, it's kind of getting a bit steeper, rising risk appetite. Look at the stock market, you know, it's hitting records after day. But he could also show that he and other Fed members are still tilting toward another rate cut. Trade war isn't over yet. Maybe you get a mini deal. So what? What's next after that? Job growth, GDP, they are both slowing. Let's take a look at a Bloomberg chart as we look at Powell to the people looking ahead of this meeting. And importantly, you can see at the beginning of the year, GDP was up nearly to 3%. Now it went down to 2%, and now in the third quarter is estimated at 1.6%. So and when you look out over 2020, then some more weakness. This is why a lot of people think the Fed will keep that door wide open. Bloomberg Economics is saying the Fed still needs more insurance cuts. They're looking back to 1995 and 1996 and then 1998, when the Fed also did 3 rate cuts, 75 basis points, and stopped. But they point out that the Fed was looking at an economy that was in better shape when they started cutting rates and was not as weak as this economy now. And certainly there was no trade war raging they had to deal with to say, no, it's not going to prove to be enough. They will do more. Again, every question a reporter asked Jay Powell at the press conference is, if it has anything to do with that, I think that's where we're going to see the big news made.
The long unspooling of what has become the Brexit situation has got another twist now. The United Kingdom will go to the polls for the third time in just 4.5 years after Prime Minister Boris Johnson won the backing of the Parliament to trigger snap polls. The polls will be held in the month of December. Jody Schneider of Bloomberg News gets us the details.
It's very important for him because he's hoping this becomes a proxy vote on Brexit. Basically, that he can then say, I won the vote. People want us to get out of the EU, and we're going to do it now. Of course, there's a January 31st deadline on that. That deadline has been extended. He wanted actually to try to do a Brexit before a snap election, but now it's going to be the other way around if he wins that. Of course, there's always risk to the Prime Minister in doing this. There's a lot of risk. So, but he basically is banking on the fact that this will be a proxy vote on Brexit, and that the public will go along with his decision to try to get the to his desire to get the UK out of the EU as soon as possible after that vote.
Jody, how much of a gamble is going to an election, and does this essentially become a proxy second referendum on how the public feels about Brexit now?
Yeah, and that's the thinking. That's certainly Boris Johnson's hope, that it is that proxy vote and that it goes in his direction. But of course, there is a risk for him that it doesn't. First of all, there were the last election in 2017, 80% of the vote combined was won by Labour and Conservative parties. That could change. There are some other parties that are on the upswing, and also you risk that there are other issues that come come up as well. The main risk to Boris Johnson right now is from Nigel Farage and his Brexit party, a newly formed Brexit party, and he could make the case that Boris Johnson did not deliver on his, off-stated promise to take the UK out of the EU on October 31st, no matter what. So that is a risk for Boris Johnson as well, coming from Eurosceptics.
All right, let's keep that on the shelf for just a bit and turn to another big story. The much-awaited Saudi Aramco IPO will finally see the light of day. Shares of the energy major will start trading on the Saudi stock exchanges from the 11th of December. That's according to Al Arabiya. The details of the IPO will apparently be announced on Sunday. Aaron Clark of Bloomberg News brings us the details we have so far.
Well, I think this really cements Saudi Aramco's status as the world's most profitable company. Like you said, $68 billion in the first 9 months of this year. We don't have a lot of other financial figures from the company. They have reported that last year they made $111 billion. So clearly, this makes them more profitable than a lot of the world's other profitable companies, including Apple and Exxon. One thing that's really interesting to note about this 9-month period in which they earned $68 billion is it was a really turbulent time for oil markets. In fact, Saudi Aramco had 2 key oil facilities that were attacked by missiles in September. Their production, and they supply about 10% of the world's oil, their production was cut in half for a couple weeks before they were able to fix those and restore production. So, it shows pretty strong earnings despite over a very turbulent time for oil markets and specifically for Saudi Aramco.
And yet investors have been unwilling to accept the valuation that Mohammed bin Salman has put on the company. So what can we expect on that IPO that has been delayed repeatedly?
Right. Well, I think the valuation is the big question here. Like you said, local media is reporting that shares will list in Saudi Arabia starting December 11th. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said the company is worth $2 trillion. A lot of analysts have said it's a lot lower, between 1.1 and 1.5 trillion, or some numbers that we're seeing. Saudi Aramco, Bloomberg has reported that Saudi Aramco is going to rely on a lot of local investors and wealthy families to invest in the company. So we'll just have to see how investors value it. There is still an international IPO that's a possibility as soon as next year. But of course, if Saudi Aramco goes that route, they're going to open themselves up to a lot more scrutiny that are required, and transparency that are required from other exchanges, in a place like New York or London. But for now, everyone is focused on the domestic IPO and when shares list December 11th.
All right, let's also have a look at what else is making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the First Word headlines.
Let's start with the latest on Brexit. The UK is preparing for a general election on December 12th. Prime Minister Boris Johnson finally managed to win backing in Parliament to trigger the snap vote and get the election date he wanted, this in an attempt to resolve the Brexit crisis. It'll be the 3rd time the UK has gone to the polls to choose a new government since 2015. To Boeing now, the CEO Dennis Muilenburg has defended the company's ability to sign off on aircraft designs while admitting that mistakes had been made. Muilenburg testified before the Senate Conference Committee, where he faced tough questioning from lawmakers over the steps that led to 2 deadly crashes. Both involved the 737 MAX jets. He said the company would review reforms proposed by Congress, but declined to endorse specific measures.
The airplane will return to service when it's safe. Right? This is not going to be timeline driven. We are committed to answering every question the regulators have, and the airplane will fly when everyone is convinced it's safe. That is the most important thing here.
To Lebanon now, Prime Minister Saad Hariri has resigned after 2 weeks of anti-government protests turned violent. This as demonstrators were attacked by supporters of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah party. Now, in a televised address, Hariri said he had reached a dead end and that it was time for what he called a major shock to confront the crisis. Protesters in Beirut thanked Hariri but are now calling for other top officials to step down. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to the Indian markets now and see how we're set up for trade today. Darshan Mehta is joining me now to tell you all about the trade setup and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Darshan, it was quite a good session yesterday, but overnight and looking at the Asian markets today, international markets seem to be just a bit subdued ahead of that decision by the Fed. How are we looking at the start today?
Yeah, so yesterday was a rather stellar move. The Nifty was up almost over 150 points. The Bank Nifty was up another 300, 400 points. So it was a very good session, and that another 50 points coming in from Diwali session. So it's been a good start, at least from Diwali. The SX Nifty is indicating a muted outlook, but things will change as we move on, because most of Asia is looking rather wobbly, but we've been doing well for ourselves over the past few days. So take a look at what happened. It was clearly the Nifty that outperformed the mid cap and the small cap end of the market. So 1.4% up move on the Nifty itself. The Bank Nifty did well. It was up 1.2%. The PSU banking index was up 0.8%. So overall, there was traction that was seen on the markets. Now, how did we pan out in trade? The big move again came in from Tata Motors. The ADR was up almost 15%. Metals as a pack did extremely well yesterday. So Vedanta was up almost 2%. Infosys has managed to move up, and ahead of the numbers tomorrow, Dr. Reddy's has been looking rather strong. So it was up almost 2%. Now, take a look at what happened with the FIs and the DIs. FI bought in almost 880 crores in the cash market. DIs were also net buyers of 145 crores, so close to 1,000 crores of buying that happened in the cash market yesterday. What led the move? Reliance was the big one, trading at new record highs, so that was up almost 3%. TCS contributed, it was up another 3%. Axis Bank was up 4%. ICICI Bank trading at new highs, so there was enough traction. Tata Motors obviously was the big one, but the weightage is rather small, but all these companies contributed significantly. What didn't do well? Bharti Airtel, Bharti Infratel continued to wane, and Kotak Mahindra Bank, one of the few private sector banks which has not contributed in the market. What happened as far as the F&O market is concerned? We are close to the 11,800 mark in trade. The rollovers are at 30%. Open interest was down 14%, and the November open interest was up almost 130%. So there was clear indication of buying. The Bank Nifty was up also 1.2% with rollovers of close to 37%. So that's what happened. As far as this series is concerned, you can see that the put writers are becoming much more aggressive. Even at 11,700, 11,800, they are writing. Call writers are active from 11,700 to higher levels, despite the market showing much more traction. So yesterday what we saw was that it was the put writers that were active, and because the market actually managed to rally significantly, the call writers were forced to shed positions in open interest. Now, stock specific and India Wix was up almost 5%. The market was looking really good yesterday. The PCR also managed to move up because the call writers had to shed positions and the put writers became much more aggressive. So that was the trend on the PCR front. Individually among the stocks, Adani Enterprises trading at record highs. So that one was up almost 6%. NMDC actually managed to move up 4% post the City upgrade, and metals as a pack was rather strong. JSW Steel was up in trade. So that's the trade setup for you.
Thanks so much for that, Darshan. Now, of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about the stocks that you have to watch out for in trade today. Do stay tuned. That'll come in just a short while. Meanwhile, let me take you through another big story that we have for you. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called for reforms at the United Nations. Speaking to co-chairman of Bridgewater Associates, Ray Dalio, at the Future Investments Initiative, the Prime Minister said that a body like the UN should not merely be an institution, but also an instrument for change, positive change, in fact. Listen in.
While you describe what we must do, I wonder whether your thoughts about whether we will do it and how we have to approach that. So when we say we, it's each individual. So let's look at some of we have a trade conflict. We have a technology conflict. We have a capital and currency conflicts going on. And we have geopolitical conflicts going on. We don't have a world organization or a world rule book. I have to be a pragmatist, and you have to be a pragmatist. How will we work together? How will that play out in your mind?
You have talked about the present-day wars in a very interesting manner, the different types of wars and conflicts that are happening in the world today. Just as the different kinds of wars have developed, the different fields have become reasons for wars. We have water, which is a reason for conflict, and space, which is a field of conflict. Land is an area for conflict. So we are creating new areas where we have conflicts, and this is perhaps a sign of the weakness of man. When the United Nations was created, it was to be an institution that was to play a catalytic role in the resolution of conflict. But unfortunately, we were not able to develop the kind of organization we needed. When the UN completed 70 years, we believed that perhaps the UN will change, there will be reforms. The UN is now going to be 75 years old very soon. I hope that all reasonable forces in the world come together and work on the form that the UN needs to take and have in the 21st century. What should be the norms to govern the world? And we need to move in this direction. We should not just, if there is a natural calamity somewhere and UN leads in the efforts for rescue, that is not enough. It needs to give direction to the world, and it won't be able to do this if it limits its functions in this manner. Also, strong people must not just develop institutions, but develop the UN as an instrument. The UN must have a neutral, global, rule-based arrangement. It must contribute to this. This was something that did not happen. I believe, where does conflict start in the world today? There are people who believe that they are so big and so great that they don't need to follow any laws. And there are some people who are burdened by laws and rules. So if we have to really run the world properly, we need to have a balance. The very fact that the universe is functioning, it is because the sun has followed its rules, then the moon has followed its rules, the earth has followed its rules. Nobody breaks rules. That is why the universe functions today. So in the world as well, countries must follow global rules, and when rules are broken, the world must come together to fight this. We must isolate such forces, and we must make efforts to bring them on the right track.
All right, now much has been said about the economic slowdown here in India, and one of the sectors that we've been watching very closely is the automotive space. Now, has the festive season proven to be the much-needed turning point for the auto sector? Mahindra Group Chairman Anand Mahindra certainly believes so. Speaking to Bloomberg News, Mahindra said that growth has picked up and there is a great deal of hope among auto players here in India for festive season sales. Listen in.
Sales are picking up and the consumption is picking up. We have a major festival called Diwali.
Yes.
Think about Christmas. So if you asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I would say, ask me after Diwali, just as you would about Christmas being an indicator. The good news is Diwali sales have been very good. We are up over last year in our sales on the Diwali week in double digits.
Talk to me about what you're doing with the production on the car side, because obviously you're a huge player. Have you had to cut production aggressively over the space of the past 10 months?
We did have more non-working days, as we call them, and we were aggressively cutting any excess inventory. I think most car companies now have, in a sense, sanitized their pipelines, and there's a great deal of hope about the season from now on.
We talk about the global slowdown. The IMF says the world is growing at the slowest pace since 2008. Make that come alive for me in terms of the business decisions that have happened for you this year. How has that slowdown become a reality in your business?
Well, it's almost like the tale of two cities, if you will. Our domestic businesses are fairly insulated from the global economy, except in a positive sense. But a lot of our businesses are now global. We own a Korean car company. We own a tractor company in Turkey. We are big players in the U.S. So we are not completely insulated from a slowdown, but it's almost different. India has its own set of challenges. The global slowdown had affected our international businesses. But again, it's a different story in different markets.
All right, on to earnings now. And despite an exceptional loss of 72 crore rupees in the current quarter, Petronet LNG managed to surpass analyst estimates. The two-times surge in the company's bottom line was aided by a deferred tax reversal of 410 crore rupees. Nishant Sharma caught up with the company's MD and CEO Prabhat Singh and began by asking him about the company's volume growth outlook. Listen in.
Volumes have been nice, and like we have expanded the capacity this year to 17.5 million tons, and we are operating in Dahej at 108% capacity, and Touchwood Kochi has also improved. We are now 16%. It should go slightly more higher in Kochi because the BPCL refinery, which was going through some shutdown for some reason or the other, is going to come back. FACT is drawing constant volumes. So I feel this 108%, if you really see the plant capacity itself, we have flocked to the ultimate where we can go. So this will remain because Kochi is showing some more signs of that. So it will be around the same. So not too much, I would say, because we don't have the capacity to even go further. But Kochi, yes, definitely a small amount would be there. So we may go to some 15-17%.
So you expect H to be better than?
I think so. I think so.
And also want to get a sense
not too
of,
much, but slightly.
Okay. Also want to get a sense of the, the MOU with Tellurium. Where are we at on that transactions? On when do we see any finalization happening on that deal?
No, we are looking at this. It's a non-binding MOU, but we actually are very, I would say, upbeat on the concept on which we are having the discussion. Where the concept of discussion is now truly that when we are sitting onto the table, like when we did this RAS gas discussion sometime in 2003, we signed. That time it was a supply short market and we were short of energy here in India, production was less. We had no choice but to buy. And therefore we were ready to give a price to whatever extent we could negotiate, we did. But a lot of risk came to us in terms of, when you can see, that we ended up negotiating everything once again in 2013, and we brought it down by nearly $7 at that point of time. Now that happened because it was a seller's market. Now today we have a buyer's market. So therefore there is a great opportunity for all the buyers to really put their conditions now onto the table and insist that, look, if there is any risk in this deal, etc., whatever is going to happen, it will have to be borne by the producer now. I am committed because I have this lever in my hand that I am a consumer and I will keep on consuming your product. So that assurance I'll give you. But price, I would like to buy whatever is the daily price or whatever is the price I like actually. And therefore, for me to give you the assurance, I will do this. So all kinds of ceilings, all kinds of geological risks, they all would, the conversation would be around that you bear everything.
Any timeline for this?
Timeline, yes, we are trying to see that somewhere around middle of next year we should be in a position to look at some things.
All right, let's turn to the aviation space now. And Indigo has placed another large order for aircraft with Airbus. And it's quite interesting. On the ticket price, at least, the value of the order should be as much as $33 billion. And I think, let me let Bloomberg's PR Sanjay get you all the details of this order.
India's largest airline by passenger carried, Indigo, is in the verge of buying another 300 odd A320 jets at the list price of around $30 billion. So this is in addition to a fleet. They've already placed orders for at least 500 planes. And this, interestingly, this acquisition is coming in the wake of a rivalry happening between two promoters, Rahul Bhatia and Rajesh Gangwal. Also, Airbus is winning this deal. Toulouse-based aircraft manufacturer is winning this deal, while our rival Boeing is losing out big time in Indian market. Indigo, which is already largest airline by passenger carried and by fleet, is trying to increase its footprint across the country, and it's also flying international. So we will have to wait and watch how Indigo is planning to deploy these many planes into crowded Indian markets and international market. However, India's largest airline by fleet and by passenger carried is going to seal the deal for the 300 planes, including XLR variants, A320 family, for tag price at $30 billion. And more details, we are awaiting more details how this carrier would be deploying their capacity in this tough market where competition is increasing and international carriers are also bolstering their presence to the fastest growing civil aviation market in the world.
All right, certainly a stock that you have to watch out for and trade today. Somit Sarkar is joining me now to tell you all about the other stocks in news. Good morning, Somit. What's on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with the key earnings. Firstly, SKF India, where the company's revenue were down nearly 2.5%. The gross margins declined by 720 basis points due to increased contribution from the industrial segment. However, the fall for the EBITDA margin was restricted at 330 basis points due to lower employee costs and lower other expenses. Net profit remained flat at close to 85 crore rupees, and that is on the back of lower tax rate that the company paid in the second quarter of financial year 2020. Tata Metallics revenues were down 6.6% because of a decline in the pig iron segment. EBITDA declined by 52% because of losses in the pig iron segment. Margins came in at 8% versus 16% reported by the company last year, while the net profit was down nearly 51% to close to 23 crore rupees. Other expenses were up 24%, while employee expenses were also up close to 11% compared to last year. Now, if you see segment-wise, pig iron segment revenues were down 14%, while the segment reported an EBIT loss of close to 17 crore rupees. Ductile iron pipe segment reported good numbers with revenues up 11%, while EBITDA almost doubled to close to 47 crore rupees. Bharti Airtel also came out with its second quarter operational numbers. Do mind it, these are not the quarterly earnings, but just the operational update that Bharti Airtel has given. Now, the India mobile business revenue was up nearly 1.1% ahead of analyst estimates at close to 10,980 crore rupees. India mobile ARPU was also ahead of analyst estimate, but declined compared to last quarter to close to 128 crore rupees. Customer base declined to 27.9 crore. 4G customer base, however, increased for the company to 20.3 crore, while the other segments, that is home broadband and DTH revenues, they were largely in line with analyst estimates. HDFC Life would also remain in focus because Standard Life will be selling close to 7.6 crore equity shares, that is 3.8% stake in the company. Now, Standard Life will be offering shares at close to 562 to 575 rupees per share, that is a discount of nearly 6 to 8% on yesterday's closing. Standard Life will look to raise close to $600 million from the stake sale and also has an option to sell additional shares worth $200 million. Bandhan Bank, because RBI has imposed a penalty of close to 1 crore rupees on the bank as it has not brought down the promoter holding below 40% as per the licensing guidelines. Now, RBI licensing guidelines require the promoter shareholding to be brought down below 40% within 3 years of starting operations. Lastly, Lakshmi Vilas Bank, on the back of the Bull deal where Capri Global acquired nearly 75 lakh shares, that is 2.2% stake in the company, while Motilal Oswal sold 43 lakh shares, that is close to 1.3% stake in the company.
All right, thanks so much for that, Somit. And to all of you who've tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in this morning. Do remember, there's a lot more that comes up over the course of the day. A lot that we discussed will play out perhaps during the trading session. Do stay tuned. This is BloombergQuint.
Attractive